Welcome to MSP Voice, the weekly show for MSPs by MSPs. Brought to you by Cloudberry, the #1 cross-platform cloud backup. Learn more at cloudberrylab.com. This is MSP Voice. Hello and welcome to MSP Voice. This is episode lucky number 13. Great show for you today. Interview today is with Jack Mortell with Strax IT. Jack and I have a great conversation about sales and specifically related to MSP and types of people we should be hiring. So Jack has a great background in sales. He basically runs sales for Strax. So great interview. But first, as now normal, we have our best of Reddit. So got 3 articles for you today from an MSP subreddit. So let's just dive right into it. First up is, what life cycles are you enforcing on hardware? Essentially, how often do you recommend your customers refresh their hardware? The original poster, he's got kind of a list of firewalls every 5 years, wireless 5 years, or when new tech comes out, switches, servers, desktops, everything 5 years, laptops 3 years, battery backup 7 to 8 years, batteries every 4 years. So he's kind of got a guideline in terms of what they look at in terms of life cycle for their customer hardware. But then he's also asking because he's talked to some others recently that basically run things until they die. So he's asking for some support from the community in terms of what's kind of the best practice. The top vote getter here with 11 points is basically they see the replace after X years all the time, but personally he thinks that every situation is a bit different. And his general rule is sometime after the warranty expires, or if the needs have changed, they need something better. Which I think can be a good rule to live by, because why replace a component at 5 years if the warranty is for 7 years? That's kind of a rule of thumb. But now there's other things too, like if it's something major, like a firewall at a big office that would cost $1 million a day and lost productivity, then maybe want to replace that a little bit more often. And then he also mentions that some HP switches have lifetime warranties. And then that kind of gets into, oh wait, lifetime isn't your lifetime, it's the lifetime of the product support from the manufacturer. So everything eventually goes end of life from a manufacturer. So that's the lifetime. It's the lifetime of the equipment from the manufacturer, not the lifetime of you. So don't think it's going to be around for the next 50 years of your lifetime. So always those lifetime guarantees. It's always kind of read the fine print. And then some others recommend for some key components is to kind of keep a spare around. If it's a router, if you have all your customers standardized on the same like networking equipment, same router, then maybe it's easy to keep a spare. And then if one of them goes out, you can easily get that spare there, get it plugged in, flash it to their configuration, and get them back up and running. Which is great if you've standardized across everything. You don't have to keep an inventory of every different type of router that you have, because you only use one type. A couple of different ways to look at it, but in general, people are saying wait till the end of the warranty. You don't have to have a hard and fast rule. And some others recommend that, hey, after a couple of years, I start telling my customers, hey, there's you might need to replace things after 3 years, and then after 5 they become more adamant about this needs to be replaced, because not everyone wants to necessarily replace all their hardware on a particular cycle. So it's always work within the different means that you have at your disposal and with your customer requests. Next up is the classic public cloud versus colo. So in this case, it's Amazon Web Services. This poster he's doing some preliminary cost benefit in terms of hosting their services in AWS or their own equipment at a colo. Which is what they currently do. So they're currently doing that. Is there a benefit to moving all of that to AWS and forgetting about the colo and their own equipment? He hasn't looked at cost yet, so he doesn't know what that looks like. And a lot of people, a lot of comments on this thread is, obviously it depends. The first one here is depends on how much volume you're looking at. If it's not a lot of volume, then AWS and others are more attractive. But once you start kind of get to that, heavy traction, then the arrows point the other way, and costs doing it on the other end are not going are not public cloud. So and that kind of becomes the theme of a lot of the replies going through here, is that something like AWS is great to start out because you don't have any capital outlay, you don't have to buy any equipment. It's great to kind of get started, but then at some point there is a tipping point somewhere where it would become cheaper if you were hosting it yourself at a colo, maybe even leasing the equipment versus that increasing bill every month from your cloud provider. So something that you definitely want to work at, and the workloads have a lot to do with it. If it's low compute but high storage, then public cloud might be great. But if it's high compute and low storage, then maybe a colo makes more sense. So it always depends on the workload. It depends on what your customers' needs are. It depends on their connection. Someone mentioned that they walked into a customer where the previous IT guy had said, oh, you're going to need $1 million in servers or whatever, so let's move everything to this. So they decided, they fired him, they moved everything to the cloud, and now they have a $6,000 a month bill from AWS, and they are not happy with it. Things are slow, their applications don't work right. So now he's in there trying to get him to say, hey, what about virtualization? For 40K, we can move everything back down and make you happy. So sometimes people hear cloud and they're like, oh yeah, let's just move everything up there and go like that. The other thing that's important about cloud is it's not just take what's running in your infrastructure and migrate it to the cloud exactly as is, kind of like a P to V, so to speak. What you really want to look at is designing for the cloud. So if you're developing your own applications and things like that, and you design it within AWS or Google or Azure, as a cloud service, that's very different than just kind of lifting a server from an on-prem location into the cloud, because things are very different. And some other posters also point out that even with AWS, you're still going to have a learning curve because you have to now learn everything about AWS, S2, EC2, S3, all those types of things, how the networking works out. So that there's still going to be a learning curve there. So there's not an easy answer in terms of public cloud or colo, or even hosting it yourself in your own data center. So kind of you have to think about these things. But there are some really good comments and suggestions in the comments. And our last article this week is there a slow season for sales in our industry? So this person, new MSP, but has noticed that prospects have dropped off considerably during the summer. He thinks maybe it's expected, while part of him is concerned, just wondering how the people's sales cycles look during summer months, if there are typical slow months throughout the year. And there's some good insight in here. So, in the United States, at least, it's summer. Even in Europe, right? People take vacations, they go, take the kids, to the beach or whatever. So things typically do slow down a bit in the summer months. But then, this one here with 5 points upvotes it'll center more around your verticals, which I thought was a great answer, because, if you look at budget cycles at companies, in within industries, they're all kind of can be different. So he's saying for nonprofits, they tend to be out of cash by the end of their fiscal, which generally hits June 1st. So if they're busy with their nonprofits up until the beginning of June, and then that dries off because their budgets have dried out. And then you look at manufacturers that have typically seasonal type of work. In this case, it was a florist. It might be farmers or whatever, but they are busy during the summer running their business. And they're not looking to do new projects. They're not looking to disrupt things. They just want everything to work for the season. And then after season, once that's done, then they start looking at, okay, how can we improve things for next year? So you'll see some of those pick up. So there is seasonality in all industries. In managed service provider, is no different. And obviously, if you're dealing with CPAs, don't bother them the first 4 or 5 months out of the year, because they're busy doing people's taxes and they don't want to talk to anything. Maybe wait until June or July to hit them up for new business. So understand your customers, understand their business cycles in terms of who you're going after. If it's a highly seasonal type of work, then guess what? There are certain times of year where things are going to dry out. And that's pretty much what everyone says, but the obvious answer is it's summer, vacations, don't want to think about it, just want to go on vacation and do those types of things. So that is our best of Reddit for this week. And as I mentioned earlier, we have now Jack Mortell with Strax IT, and we talk about sales, and I think you're really, really going to like it. So enjoy the show, and I'll talk to you next week. Hello and welcome to the interview portion. Today I am happy to be joined by Jack Mortell from Strax IT. So Jack, why don't you give us a little bit of information about yourself and your managed services business?
Great, Doug. Thanks for having me here today to chat with you about this. Stratx IT is a combination of two companies that came together 2 years ago. We were both managed service providers in the New York metro area. Both companies have been around since around year 2000, and combined we're about a 60-person organization, again servicing the New York area and with a focus in healthcare.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So that's actually one of my questions. You specialize in a vertical, so we got that out of the way, didn't we? No, that's all right. So I guess kind of, what led you down the managed services path? What was kind of the idea behind that?
It really, for us, it really evolved into something. I was in software sales, and and what happened is in Y2K started sneaking up, and there was a lot of hardware work to do. I was dealing with a client base, mostly in medical, again, mostly in the software management. They were not electronic medical records at the time. This predates that. But they were, practice management systems and billing systems. And, we had a client base of about 100 practices that were running this practice management system that was on Novell NetWare 311. And I remember those days. And maybe I'm dating myself here, but I remember prior to that too, when we were dealing with SEO Unix. But there was a lot of hardware work to do. There were a lot of refreshes and a lot of Windows networks to put in, and that's really where our company spun up from. That was the roots of the company.
Okay, great. So so it sounds like you were you always had like an IT career, maybe sales type career, always in that type of arena.
Yes, yeah. Right out of college, it was either get into this business, which was an opportunity for me, or go to law school, and I made the right decision. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no. There aren't a ton of jokes about IT service providers like there are for lawyers, are there?
No.
Well, there might be. We just don't know.
Not that type.
Great. And then, so you already said you guys specialize in the healthcare industry.
Yes.
So, and it sounds like that was just kind of how the business evolved, or was there a conscious decision to say, let's focus on healthcare?
Correct. Actually, it was an opposite. So we started in healthcare. I originally worked for a VAR, or value-added reseller of a practice management system. And so we dealt on the hardware side and we dealt on the software side. And I was in sales in that job, selling service contracts for hardware and software to physician practices in the New York metro area and up through New England. And again, when Y2K came, it was really a big boom for us and a springboard in order to give us the ability to start the company.
Yeah. Okay.
So we broke off and started the company addressing these networks. And so healthcare was where we were. As time evolved and as we realized it was getting hard to pick up new clients outside of that realm, we started delving out into other industries, real estate, law firms, you name it, small businesses that require MSPs. And we then made a conscious effort to kind of focus back on healthcare, especially as electronic medical records started to, show up and started to become a thing.
Yeah.
And over time, we still struggle with this. Do we stay in healthcare? We have an expertise in healthcare, and we know the lingo of healthcare. We understand the security needs around healthcare. So I would definitely say we're an expert in healthcare, but we still struggle with is it the best market to stay in, or should we diversify ourselves? So I would say we're 90% healthcare, but we certainly have clients outside of the healthcare arena.
Okay, yeah, and you said you have about 60 folks there, so
Yeah.
that's pretty good size.
Yes.
I know a lot of our listeners are one person shops or
Sure.
just a couple of people, and so it's good to see an MSP that's focusing on healthcare and is actually on that larger size.
Yeah.
Um,
Sometimes I miss the days of being a five-man shop. It, it it doesn't get easier. They're just different steps and stages along the way,
yeah,
and I can't say one's better than the other.
yeah. So, but what's really interesting to me is that your background is in sales.
Yes.
And you essentially kind of run sales over there at Strax. And so I thought, what a great idea to talk a little bit about sales and how sales and the MSP world works. So because I know if you go to Reddit and you read some of the things, there's always people asking, should I hire a salesperson? How do I compensate? There's all these questions about salespeople because a lot of the people who start an MSP, they come at it from the technical angle. They don't have necessarily the sales and marketing experience. Some
Right.
do, but not a lot of them do. So, what makes a great salesperson for an MSP?
Um, that's a very difficult question and a very logical one. And I would venture to say, and being part of other peer groups and things going on in the MSP community, sales and marketing are the trickiest parts to pin down. The technology, I don't think is the hard part.
Yeah.
The machines are they're honest with you. So as far as sales go, we've had our fair share of salespeople move through here. We've hired many that we thought would be good and had it not work out.
Yeah.
I will say that in my experience, and we'll call it wisdom, we need to network. We need to be out talking to people. If you ask people, even your friends and family and other business colleagues, if they're happy with their IT service provider, don't call it an MSP because not everybody knows what that is.
Yeah.
Half the time you're going to get somebody who says, no, I'm not happy. And if you peel back the onion a little bit and ask them some more questions, I find, the majority of the time, the issues are not technology related, they're service related.
Yeah.
They don't like the people servicing them, or they don't like the response times they get, or the completion of projects or just problems or tickets. So in hiring salesperson, it's critical that those people be able to open up and talk to people, and have those conversations. And again, it's not always easy because there are distinct personality types, and to be able to get them to open up and talk to you as a salesperson sometimes can be the challenge, especially in the New York metro area. People are very guarded.
Yeah, well, but I, also throughout my career, I know very few introvert salespeople.
Right.
Most people who are in sales, they love to talk. So that typically, isn't too much of an issue.
So there's a little dichotomy with that. I agree wholeheartedly that you need outgoing people. They can't be introverted. It won't work. But a lot of times we find the outgoing people also don't like to be rejected.
Yeah,
and sales is very much a numbers game. You need to have a lot of conversations, and the vast majority of them are going to tell you no. In one way or the other, are they going to tell you no over and over and over again? And so that those two personalities, the outgoing person typically doesn't like to be told no. It can actually insult them, and sometimes they're quite sensitive too.
Yeah, that's very good to know. Yeah. Last week I was going through some Reddit articles, and I talked about it at the opening of last week's episode. Someone was asking about sales on Reddit. Someone had a very good post that talked about the different types of salespeople, and I delved into that a little bit. This idea of hunters and farmers.
Yep.
It's a term that I'm familiar with because I've worked with salespeople for many years, but not necessarily everyone understands what that is in terms of sales terminology, and what is best. Is it you want only hunters, you want only farmers, or do you want a combination of both? So what's your kind of experience? Maybe explain what you think it means hunters and farmers are, and then kind of delve into what makes it good for IT service providers.
So the hunter to me is the person who's out there talking to people. I call it turning over stones. You're not going to find new business unless you're turning over stones, and unless you've figured out how to master marketing, which I have not. Our company has not, and we've spent tremendous amounts of money trying, and we won't stop trying until we figure it out. But I'm not so confident we're going to figure it out at this level. You need to be talking to people, and that can be any number of ways. Again, I think there are plenty of people out there looking for these services. They're looking for a service provider to help them with IT, and you have to have conversations with a lot of people. And if you're not doing that, you're not a hunter, in my mind. So the hunter cannot be behind a desk. They need to be out moving. That's my personal opinion about it, but I think I'm right. The farmer or the nurturer in our organization typically acts in an account management role. We get a lot of calls. We have a lot of customers, and there's a lot of hardware out there and operating systems and all the stuff we do. And thank God it needs to be refreshed. And the technology is always changing, which is a nice thing. So once you have the client, keeping the client is important because we know how hard it is to hunt. So the gatherer, or the person on the inside that is the salesperson on the inside is a critical role for the organization as well. So there are two different roles. We have them divided that way. We keep our gatherers on the inside on an inside sales capacity, account management capacity, and then we put our outside people on for new business. And they are much more quota driven than the inside people. Although we want inside sales, we also don't want to twist our customers' arms too much so that they feel like we're just selling them stuff. And that can be a difficult balance as well.
Yeah, so because I know, it depends, sometimes when you talk about the inside versus outside sales models, depending on how the company's set up and those types of things, sometimes, it's the inside person who's supporting the hunter. They're following up on leads and setting up meetings. And then other times, like you said, the hunter is out there, on the outside, doing their work to bring them in. And then once they bring them in, they hand it over to inside. And then the inside person then becomes the account manager and services that customers needs, as they need new things and those types of things. So it's
correct.
Yeah, but it's still an inside outside model. And
it is, and it can be a tricky balance, and it can be played lots of different ways. This is not unlike a sport. Everybody's personality types and skill set can lend themselves well to performing certain tasks, and that might be quote building, that might be follow up with clients, that may be dealing with problems, or liaison back to the service desk. So we tend to want to put everything into boxes and shape them the way everybody else does it, or the way someone else says it should be done. And I think you have to look at your people and your skill sets and manipulate it if you want to get the most out of them. The positions are not always purely defined. And again, if you think back to, again, from my experiences, most of the MSPs that I know became MSPs because it was owner-led sales, and the owner helped somebody with a problem. And somehow 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 customers later, as they were referred to them because they solved somebody's problem, they then start to grow and start to define these roles within the organization, and it becomes hard to manage that. It's very tricky, and we want to apply metrics to it. And we want to put numbers against it so that we can manage it intelligently. But sometimes we forget what got us there, and we have to go back to that. Many times I find that our hunters need to go back to the clients they sold and ask for referrals, or just rekindle that relationship, and the referrals come right after it.
Okay. Yeah, that's great advice. And so in terms of the technical aspects, because obviously what you're selling is technical. You need to be talking to technical people, typically, not always, right? The initial meeting, maybe not. But at some point, you're going to get to the point where, hey, I've got to talk to these people about their technology needs. Now, do you rely on your salespeople to do that, or do you bring in an engineer for those types of meetings?
It depends on the sale. I would say more often than not, the salesperson is handling the technical conversation with the client. There are instances where, maybe it's a larger deployment and there are other technical people on the other side. So we could talk shop at that point. Typically with our clients, I want to understand their problems and make sure that my proposals and or the pitch is addressing the problems they spoke to me.
Okay.
So I don't like to go in and talk about, what type of firewall and the throughput and the packet inspection and all of the details. They don't care. Typically, they don't care. There are organizations that care and want to know the details and specifications. But if you're at that, I'll call it a visceral level where you're addressing their problems, they'll have a trust in you. If you don't have that trust, it's very hard to maintain that client anyway, because then everybody's just, thinking you're trying to sell them. So I try and avoid having the engineer in the presentation unless it's required for that sale.
Okay. So now, once the sale has been made and, you send the engineers out there to do the implementation, or maybe it's on site one day a week or whatever. How important of a role does that engineer then play in the sales process moving forward?
They're critical if they're on site. So there are different types of engineers as well. So there are engineers that probably should be left in the background and not front facing to the client. A lot of people are attracted to computers and or computer science or engineering because they don't like people. And so there are definitely, we'll call them techs. There are techs that are dynamic and can handle people and understand the technical jargon or what we're trying to accomplish. And those are the people that we try and keep in front of the client. Again, not every situation is a little bit different, and sometimes you're going to have to shuffle them around. But I think it's important as an owner in any size organization that you keep an eye on it as well, or that the salesperson has an eye on it during transition from the initial sale into the time they become, we'll call it a regular customer, not during onboarding. I think the salesperson needs to stay involved during onboarding. I think that's critical. Again, the person developed their trust with the salesperson. And so if the salesperson drops out, and on paper, the salesperson should drop out, they should go back to hunting because that's how we're going to make our quotas and that's how we're going to sell more. But if there's no smooth transition over a period of time of the salesperson backing away and they're just thrust into the engineers and account managers, that can go poorly. So you need to keep an eye on that and make sure the customer is staying happy and that they're communicating at the same level they were with the salesperson that they are to account management and or the engineers or techs.
Yeah. So, and then, the other thing too, it's common question is compensation. And I think, you've already touched on it a little bit because you've got your hunters, the outside, they're typically more commission based.
Yes.
And then you've got your inside and you're using them as account managers. They probably have some commission, but they're probably more salary than commission. Is that
correct? Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Because the inside people, in our opinion, the inside people, if we just drive them on sales, we're going to start pushing the existing clients into products that, hey, we may all agree that they need them, but their focus will be on driving that number rather than understanding what the client needs and having and developing that rapport and maintaining that rapport with the client. So we don't over incentivize on inside sales. There's definitely some emphasis on it, but it's not the primary emphasis. The primary emphasis is on maintaining the client. Again, there's definitely turnover in this business. It's arguable as to how much there should be, but I would say depending upon the size of the organization, you can lose 5 to 7% of your client base each year. Wow. And sales would have to maintain that number just to stay even. And we all know the new client is much harder, even though maybe we're charging for onboarding, maybe we're not. The new client, there's a learning curve. There's a learning curve on the technology side, and there's a learning curve on the rapport with the client and understanding who's who in the organization and how best to serve that client. And so we really want to keep those clients. So driving them just by numbers can be very dangerous.
No, definitely. Totally agree with that. So thank you so much for some of that sales insight. Sure. One question that I did that kind of came up as we were talking though was, you guys are established. You've got 60 people. You've got an inside outside model. And that's great for what people should aspire to. Right. But if you're just starting out and you're looking at hiring your first salesperson because you're an owner operator, and it's like you can't do this. So you want to bring someone in. Is it best to start on the inside, on the outside? What is your suggestion on where to start with building a sales organization? Yeah,
it's a tricky question because if you, in my mind, if you're just hiring somebody for outside and maybe they have, maybe they have a sales background. Maybe you've seen them selling technology products. Maybe they've never sold technology products before, right? But they have the sales skills. They're outgoing. They understand sales, or they understand different people's personalities. That's the real key for me, is people that can adapt to different personality types is really a skill, and it's usually fairly natural and not taught. That's my opinion. Some people say you can teach it, but I don't know about that. Whether you put them inside first or outside first, I don't know that there's a right or wrong way. I would tend to think in a small organization, you're going to need them to wear more than one hat. Yeah. So I would put them on the inside and get their feet wet, and then make sure you allot a certain amount of time to hunting. And again, in my estimation, they need to be out in front of people, talking to people. And they don't have to be slick. They just have to be a little fearless and not afraid to ask questions. They don't have to be slick and good looking. I think that's a misconception. In fact, I think
a lot of salespeople
off. You know?
Sorry. Yeah, no, I agree. You know, it's not about, you know, being polished and having the most expensive suit and those types of things. It's, you know, just being a normal person.
Right.
Because that was one of the, you know, the previous company I was at. It was always, you know, speak from the heart. You know, don't try to make things up. Don't try to overinflate things. Just, you know, speak from the heart and just be yourself.
Right.
Don't try to do something like
that. There is some validity to being passionate about your business. You know, I think people want to work with companies or individuals that are passionate about what they do and believe in what they do. So if you believe in what you do, and this is why a lot of owners have success in sales, because they run the company and they believe in what they do, and that aura comes out, and the client or the prospect feels that you can help them with something, and that they want you to help them with something. Transferring that to an outside salesperson can be difficult, but it's important that they feel it, or that the owners are assisting them in helping them get that message out. A lot of technical owners want to back away from sales once they have a certain measure of success and hand it off to other salespeople, and just put metrics in place and say, well, how many calls did you make? How many events did you attend? I believe those are important and they should be measured. Clearly, we want to make sure the behaviors are there. But they need to also be able to carry the message that the company has, or the company's culture, outward. And in a small company, maybe we don't have the culture very well defined or written out or plastered all over the walls. But the owner knows what it is, and it needs to be the owner's message.
Yep. Yeah, and I very much agree with that. And we, like I said, we had a set of core values, and you know, everyone in the company, you know, just kind of understood those. It's just 5 simple things, but you know what? It was something that everyone understood. These are our core values. This is what we do. So the sooner you can establish those, you know, really the better. Like you said, the owner knows. It's just taking time to think, what are our core values? What do we believe in? And then just kind of pushing that out to make sure everyone follows that. And it's not just sales. It's not just, you know, techs. It's everyone. It's the entire company. So that's part of
I think it's also important to understand that your core values don't have to be what you look up on the internet. You know, when we started our first company and it grew, I can tell you our core value was answer the phone. Because when people are calling with a problem and they want an answer, they don't want to wait. They want to talk to somebody, and if they talk to them quickly, they feel like they're being taken care of. If they leave a voice message and somebody's going to get back to them in an hour or two, they're going to call back again. So you're going to drive your call center numbers up, and so it can be very simple. It doesn't have to be complicated or, you know, perfectly oiled and organized. I can tell you, as large as we are, we have lots of faults. Every organization does, and the more stuff we read about MSPs and how to do it and how to do this and different models, and you know, we get together with other MSPs and other peers and compare notes. They're all flawed and they all have tons of problems. So you know, that's kind of par for the course.
Yeah, nothing's perfect in this business. Yeah, I think you know, there's no set playbook to follow. It's just, you know, get out there and do what you can and make people happy.
But again, if that prospect or customer feels like you're working for them and on their side, typically they'll forgive the faults. You know, as long as the fundamentals are there, the blocking and tackling is working, you can, you know, win and maintain some clients.
Yeah. So you mentioned you mentioned community is one of the things I talk about. You've mentioned that you're a member of some of the peer groups
Yes.
out there. Now obviously there's peer groups that some are geared more towards the technical side, others that are geared more towards the owner operator or sales side.
Right.
What ones have you found to be beneficial, or what that you belong to?
We're members of HTG,
Okay.
and I find it invaluable, and it's at many different levels. A lot of it is, in my mind, is talking to your peers about the problems you're having,
Hmm.
and especially as you grow, the hiring becomes very difficult, and regulations become very difficult in human
Yeah.
resources. Your product stack, what products and services you're providing to your clients, and how you're doing that. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. If you're going to
Yeah.
deploy an RMM, or you're going to deploy, new antivirus software, or a SIEM solution, there's no reason for you to have to figure it all out. There are other people
Hmm.
out there that have done it in these communities, and they can tell you what it took to do it, where their pitfalls were, how much it cost. So I find that those groups are invaluable in lots of different ways. They'll
Yeah.
also drive you to focus on certain numbers and make sure you're growing your business, or look
Yeah.
at, maybe you've got some clients that are really not helping your bottom line, and you can be blind to it. It's very easy to get mired in the day-to-day business and not understand what you're doing,
Yeah.
especially as a smaller MSP. I think the peer groups are invaluable for smaller MSPs
Okay. Yeah. And
and
that,
large.
I would. Go ahead.
And large.
Oh.
Again, we're not doing anything unique. We're helping somebody with a problem, and it's really a service business. So
Mhm.
talking to others is a smart thing to do. And they're not
Yeah.
all
And I
going to
know.
compete with you. And most of the good peer groups don't have you, talking to your primary competitor
Yeah.
on a regular basis. So
Yeah, but definitely the peer groups, that I've seen, that most people I've talked to are very happy to be part of them. But then also, I talk a lot about community, whether it's, you're in Reddit or you're in Spiceworks or whatever,
yeah,
just having kind of a community of your peers and just kind of be able to put a question out there and get answers from people who've been through it is extremely important.
yeah, absolutely. And there are a lot. I can tell you our person in charge, our COO, who's also in charge of service delivery, is very active in the online community and asking questions and how others are
Hmm.
dealing with it. And again, there are people that spend a lot of time on that, giving feedback and helping each other. And it can go beyond that. It can turn into phone calls. A lot,
Yeah.
again, we're not alone. There's a lot of MSPs out there, and there's a lot of IT to service. So, um, I would definitely encourage people to go out and talk about it, and talk about sales. See what's working for others.
Yeah.
And every market's a little bit different. But the ideas are not new, and they're not only in this business. You can ask people in other businesses how they're approaching sales as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, sale, that I've been not necessarily a salesperson, but I've been attached to sales teams for a long part of my career. So,
Right.
I kind of understand. I would never, I don't want to carry a quota myself. I was always more on the technical side, but it's definitely you can, when you work around a lot of salespeople, you can definitely tell the personality types. You can tell the hunters from the farmers and those types of things. So, it's kind of interesting. It's a little bit of a different world if you're coming from a technology background and then looking at the sales background. It's a bit of a
Right.
different world, but like you said, it's nothing new.
No.
There's plenty of ideas out there. There's plenty of quote unquote best practices, but it's fairly easy to find something that's going to work for you.
Right. Right.
So
And again, who we're selling to, I talk about this often with colleagues and friends. There's a need for technology advisors.
mhm.
At all levels. And if you're servicing the 50 end users and down, they're certainly not going to have in-house people, and so
Yeah.
they need us.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of getting that out of them and having that conversation. It's not threatening. We're not selling whole life insurance here. It's not that hard. We're not selling, something that's obscure to them, or they won't see a benefit. They should see a benefit
Mhm.
from using our services. And quite honestly, those are the customers we want. The ones that we can
Yeah.
service and make happy. Those are the best customers that will stick around for 10, 15 years.
I agree. Okay, so with that, again, thanks for all your insight on sales. I guess our listeners are going to be very, very interested in this episode.
Right.
But I do now have to go to our rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So these are easy.
Okay.
It's not hard. Simple answer. So I'm gonna ask and then just blurt out your answer, and we'll go through them relatively quickly. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Apple or Android?
Android.
Mac, Linux, or Windows?
Windows.
Okay. Amazon or Azure? Or
Azure.
something else?
Azure.
Okay. Local backups or cloud or both?
Both.
Okay. And then which is worse, printer support or vendor cold calls?
Vendor cold calls.
Great. So that was it. That was a rapid fire.
And I'm a sales guy, and I still don't like getting cold calls.
Yeah, but vendors still call you, right?
Oh, sure they do.
So it doesn't matter what part of the organization you're in. It seems like someone's always trying to sell you something.
That's true. That's true.
So again, this has been great. I really appreciate you being on here, Jack. Any parting words or words of advice for any MSPs out there?
Be passionate. Be passionate about what you do and talk about it, because people want to work with passionate people that like what they do. Mm-hmm. We can very easily get sucked into our day-to-day and focus on the challenges we have. And I can tell you, in every business, there are challenges and days you don't want to be at work, and it's just tough, and you scratch your head and go, what am I doing this for? But the reality is we like doing it. And if you don't like doing it, get out of it. It's not a good business for you. So be passionate about it, talk about it, and people will be attracted to you and want to use you.
That is great advice. I really appreciate it. So,
great.
Jack, thanks again, and hopefully
Doug.
we'll get a chance to talk again or meet in person someday.
Love to.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.